Hi there, I'm going to do a review for Back to the Future 3. This movie came out in 1990 and stars the same people as basically the first two movies. You got Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Elizabeth Shue, and this movie is different than the other two because after the events of the second movie, where basically Doc Brown gets zapped to a different timeline, basically to the past. This movie is a continuation as they move into the past and move into 1885. But more or less, the movie had to continue on where Marty finds this information out in 1955. So he has to go find the Doc Brown in 1955 and find the time machine in an abandoned mining area, I guess is where they found it. And find out. A little bit hard to believe to me that they have found the time machine in an abandoned mine. That nobody else has been there in 70 years. It's hard to believe to me that that's where he stored it. Nonetheless, it's also hard to believe it's still running after 70 years. Obviously, I was like thinking, I don't know what gasoline you put in there because I mean I guess you don't take these movies too serious. It's time travel movies, so and it deals with time travel in a hard way because there's too many timelines to adjust for. But nonetheless, no, this movie is kind of curious because they find that they take the time machine that was they're coming from 1885, they bring it in out of the shop, replace all the equipment, most of the electronics that fried in the second movie, and then Michael J. Marty McFly ends up taking the time machine back in time to 1885 and finding Christopher Lloyd back there, finding Doc Brown again. And of course, he when he does go back in time, it's a little bit of an interesting shot because he's ends up wandering around um, Hill Valley of 1885, which is of course a little village at this point. And the result is that it's kind of he of course looks out of place because the Doc Brown of 1955 was used to the westerns of that time, and then you get to 1885 and he looks a little bit out of place. But nonetheless, no, he meets up with what is it, Buford Tannen or Buford Mad Dog Tannen, who's apparently a criminal of sorts, and he's got his motley band of men. And this is where things kind of get interesting because, of course, Marty doesn't know any better and does a little bit of teasing. And of course, he asks for things and says things that kind of don't make sense for the timeline. Nonetheless, this is where the movie starts, and then he almost gets hanged by Buford, and that's when Christopher Lloyd's Doc Brown shows up and gets him out of the situation. Nonetheless, this introduces all the concepts of the movie. Is that he wasn't supposed to come back, but he does it anyways, and it's kind of an interesting sequence because he learns about the letter he wrote, or he learns about Clara Clayton, of course. He learns a bunch of things. Um, it's kind of a weird movie in the sense that it now has a problem because Marty explains how they're out of fuel because, of course, when he got back to the past, he inadvertently tore the fuel line. The result is that they have to now get fuel in the car, find some way to get it up to speed for a time jump. Um, and they try numerous ways to do that, but and they really run into a problem where they now have to figure out what can get them up to 88 miles an hour, and there's not too many options because 1885 steam locomotives are not even really up to the task. Nonetheless, they do figure out a way to do it. They do figure out a way to get that steam locomotive up to 1885, up to 88 miles an hour. And they also figured out how to get the caboose going. What does happen too is that they find out who Claire Clayton is, and they find out, and they inadvertently change the timeline on that one. So now it's not going to be called Clayton Ravine anymore. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting movie because there's multiple subplots getting generated by the fact that basically Buford Tannen has it out for Doc Brown. The whole matter of $80 was that it's a horse and a whiskey bottle. So yeah, and back then $80 was quite a bit of money. That was a lot of money to have. Actually, it's kind of curious in Doc Brown in this movie is he somehow managed to figure out how to make ice in 1885. Apparently, he's got some sort of refrigerator thing device. He also figures out how to apparently figure out how to build a sniper rifle, more or less. It's kind of a curious movie. It's interesting nonetheless. It's fun. I think that's all they had. All they ever had to be was just fun. They had fun with the concept of time travel. Fun with the concept that Marty is in the past and he's dealing with different people. And it is nice that that he ends up dealing with the problems of the past, trying to figure out what to do. Nonetheless, now they got to get this car up to 88. They do run into a problem. They end up going to a party. They get their picture taken. Also, Marty inadvertently uses a real gun to run a game, and they were wondering how he learned how to shoot. He says 7-Eleven because, of course, they don't know what 7-Eleven means yet. I think even Doc Brown of 1955 wouldn't know what 7-Eleven actually meant because I don't know if 7-Eleven was even a thing in his time. And nonetheless, they get things going, they get things done. This movie, though, does some interesting concepts. In a way, it's almost the equal of the first two movies. It's actually probably better than the second one because it doesn't have quite as much time jumping. It's got a pretty standard timeline system. Instead, Marty is trying to get Doc Brown back to normal time. But nonetheless, Doc Brown is starting to develop a liking to Clara Clayton. And of course, they have things in common because they're both scientifically minded. She was brought in to be a teacher at the school, and that's basically what the whole thing was, is that was supposed to be her thing. Nonetheless, this movie continues forth and has a pretty good time with itself. There's a party, and of course, Buford Tannen shows up and causes a scene, and then I guess the sheriff was just randomly there. But yeah, it's an interesting movie, and of course, when they go to take the locomotive away, they have to do a hold up on the crew, and turns out Doc Brown has developed some fuel things for the train so that when they pass, so the first, he's got 3 bundles. First bundle is to get up to a certain speed. Second bundle, they got 3 different bundles for 3 different things. He puts them in, and so as each one hits temperature point, it ends up causing the next one to go off, and the result is that they'll get up to speed. Of course, Time Machine's a little bit different of a story because Clara turns out, for a bit there was a falling out because Doc Brown was going to head back into the future, and Clara Clayton, of course, does not believe him. She thinks he's trying to get away and thinks that the whole thing is a ruse and thinks he's just trying to drop the relationship. And yeah, it's not too bad of a storyline. The whole thing about getting up the train to 88 miles an hour though is funny because Clara ends up changing her mind on some stuff and follows the train. and she ends up getting on the train. It produces some funny sequences because, of course, she has to keep on holding on for life when the different fire logs blow and generate the movement. And then at the end, of course, Doc Brown saves her with using the hoverboard, and Marty McFly ends up going back into 1985. And when he gets back to 1985 and introduces another scenario, is that he fixes his own timeline. The problem with his future is that apparently when he got into a race with somebody from his timeline, Needles or whatever, I don't know what his name is. They only show him in Back to the Future 3. And very briefly in Back to the Future 2. But nonetheless, it turns out he runs into a Rolls Royce or something, and that causes his entire timeline to change up. So when they get to 1985, he fixes his own timeline inadvertently by not getting in the race with Needles, and they end up going backward, and they end up changing that future. And so all the stuff that had happened in 2015 ends up being erased anyways. So it makes you wonder about the whole storyline of 2015. Nonetheless, Doc Brown shows up in 1985 because, of course, he rigged out a train with a floating device system and also time machine stuff, and shows up, and of course, him and Clara are together, and they got two kids, and that's the beauty of the future timeline. And then we get, and that's when an interesting scene happens. Basically, that's the end. I think, kind of a beautiful finish because, of course, it wasn't supposed to be like it does produce a comedic moment because the DeLorean gets destroyed by a train, and then they come back to the site. They're wondering why the bars are going down. There's no obvious train, and then Doc Brown's train comes out of nowhere. So I don't know how that system actually knew that something was about to happen, but whatever, it happened. It doesn't really matter what it needed to do. But there it is. There's Back to the Future 3. Certainly good watch, up to par with the other two, I think. Probably not as good as the first one, but it's definitely entertaining, definitely fun, definitely gets the story finalized. Yeah.